Well, hello there. This is Tamil, and today I wanted to talk about how to draw flowers. There are different ways to draw flowers, but today I wanted to talk about just a general approach how to do this and, just have fun with it and how to study flowers and try to think about the form and shape. So, first of all, I just want to talk there is iconography. So, as kids, we usually just draw like a circle and something like this, and we finish it, and we can say that this is a flower. And at the end of the day, if you show this to someone, they will be like, "This is a flower." And there's nothing wrong with this, and there are some ways that you can actually use this over different styles and approaches. So this is an icon of a flower. It's not a real flower, it's more like something we recognize as a flower. If you want to try to practice your three-dimensional skills and things like that, then I suggest you try to think about flower as a form. And this is how you would do this. First of all, I can say that I'm just using a simple pencil, darker pencil. You can find it in the pencil section, and there's nothing fancy about this. It's just a simple thing. And here's how you think about drawing. And I'll get to the fun flower painting in just a bit. But if you think about form, you can actually see how it's creating form, right? If it's a cube or anything like that. And that's a plane. This is this whole thing. That's one plane. And this is what we want to practice and emphasize when we going to approach different flowers and how to show form. And so this is just a simple example, but we can apply this to different things. For example, we can think of a flower, right? If we draw a flower and it has different things to it and the petal. First of all, we want to think about the stem, I think that's what it's called. And we can think of it as a cylinder. So we can draw a proper cylinder, which obviously is going to be a little bit not as thick like this, but it's just enlarged. And this is going to be your stem. And by using line, you can show that there's form to it like this. So this is actually curving, and you just follow what the actual form is going. And this will help us to think about it as a 3D thing instead of just a icon. And this is simple because this is just a cylinder, but when it comes to petals, this is the hard part, and this is how we usually show depth in our drawing. Very simplified, you can think of petals as kind of a ribbon, right? So if we draw a ribbon, it's very simple. This is good, this is really good, but at the same time, we want to make sure that our flower has some thickness to it, because petals, even though they're thin, they're not as thin as this, and we want to exaggerate things as artists, right? So we can just imagine this, and I hope I get this right. And I probably should do this a lot faster so it's less wobbly, but this is something like that. So this is a ribbon, and it has some thickness to it, right? And this is a lot better, and this is how we should think when it comes to drawing petals. And we want to draw lines that will follow the direction of that thing. And it same goes for curvature. So if you have a petal, we don't know what and how this looks, where the shade is going. But if you add a little bit of thickness in here, you can actually say, well, this is curving this way, right? And just like that, we gave our stem just a little bit more thickness, and we can see that this is going to be going this direction. And we want to make it more organic at the end of the day. And after you're done with this, you can shade it pretty simple. So think about where there's not going to be a lot of light. So let's say the light is coming this way. And in here, you can just shade, just completely color in this part. And it doesn't look as, as pretty as amazing, but it definitely helps with understanding how real flower will look like and how to transfer from icon into something more three-dimensional. So this is more 3D, and that's and also don't forget that some of it can overlap. So this is the hard part. So it's okay if we fail as we do this, because it definitely I do. But if your petal starts here and it goes this way, then there's going to be overlap. And this is how hard it is to show the overlap, because we don't think in lines when we look at objects. We think about shapes and light, and so we will have to fake it a little bit. So this goes here, and this goes here, and this will go here. And so this is our petal, and we want to make sure that we know that this has thickness, right? Because we don't want a very thin petal. So this goes in here, and it curves down here, and there we go. So this is very sloppy, but you can show form also by adding these same lines to show that it is actually curving instead of just being a very straight object. And as we discussed before, we want to do a core shadow. So this is core shadow. We want to show form so that when someone looks at this and we're like, well, what is this? You can think about it in terms of light. And so if you do this, so let's say the light is coming from this way. Now we can do a core shadow in here, core shadow in here. And also don't forget that because this is going to be at the bottom, this whole thing might as well just be in the shadow. So let's make a new layer, do 50%, just so we can't see what we're doing. And so this whole part, this is going to be covered in shadow for the most part, right? Because it's under, it's the back of the thing. It's not the front that is hitting the light. And if you go behind, we can actually do a little bit more, 50%, and go all the way up for the light. And this is going to be hitting these parts, right? So this is how it's going to hit the light in here. And somewhere here, it's going to be fleeing into less strong, because the light will hit and bounce off, but it's really hard for the light to get in here. So pretty simple. You can just get an airbrush probably and erase some of this. And there we go. For this, if you really want to, you can actually, for example, we can separate this part. And at the end of the day, we can reduce the opacity and do a new line pass. And just like this, it's done. It's pretty simple, a little bit messy, but you can actually get a better result if you increase the stabilization, be very precise with your lines and things like that. But it's not really the point of the exercise. At the end of the day, this is more about showing form and understanding how it looks like. And this is time consuming, right? But It's not really as important to shade it like this. You can actually shade with line as well. So let's just do a quick demonstration. Flowers usually start somewhere here, and the petals, they'll go all different directions and different ways, and it's alright if they're a little bit weird looking. And also, don't forget to find a good reference. You can find one on, just go to the garden or park, or even find one off the internet. I know, crazy concept, finding pictures off the internet to draw. But this way, it comes off just like that. And we want to do a stem, so we can just do this. And it's alright if it's not perfect, but you can show form, and with a little bit of line, just like that, we can show that this is a cylinder, and we want to communicate with our audience that this is indeed a 3D form. And again, this is for practice. This is not for getting likes on Instagram or anything like that. After this, we can think about how it's going to curve as a petal. So we can just do this. And in here, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go ahead and add a little bit of thickness and show form just by using a little bit of line work in here. And just like that, we already are showing what and how petal looks like, right? You can see that in here, the main side that is going to be thick, it's this way, right? And this is our going to be core shadow again. So this is this little part, this is this. And now we can just go ahead and do the same for the other petals. And just like this, we pretty much did this whole part, and we can actually add a little bit more to this and show that these will also be cylindrical and without any shading. This is not even shading, this is just showing form. We already can see what the flower looks like. Another thing that we can obviously do, just like before, we can get a core shadow in here and just fill it in. And if you want to get fancy and you want to draw something that is more, artistic and but still use ink, I will get into painting in a bit. You can just grab a G pen that is going to do pretty fine, and you can maybe increase the stabilization just a bit. And now we can just draw different flowers, but just keep in mind all the form and 3D things that we learned. First, we start with an outline of whatever shape that we want for our flower. And this is going to be kind of tricky if you haven't done your sketch. So I recommend you doing a sketch in the beginning, and you can always just erase some of it since it's all digital. That's the best part about using Clip Studio Paint. You can just go ahead and delete things that don't look as good. And once we finish this part, we can go ahead and start shading. And shading really depends on what kind of flower you're doing, things like that. But generally speaking, I would make my brush just a bit smaller, and then I'll start shading from one part to the stem, right? But keep in mind that this is not going to be a straight line, because as we learned in before, we want to make sure that this follows form, and think about the form and use that to your advantage to try to draw what is going to be working for this. And from here, I will start doing just a little bit of line work that will show form for this. And usually, as you go, you want to make sure that whatever is closer here is going to be a little bit thicker, and whatever is further, it's going to be very thin lines. And now we just keep doing this for pretty much the rest of the flower. And just like that, you can start shading with a flower and just give it a little bit more aesthetic. And you can also vary the line weight, right? So let's do one more pass and think about where is going to be core shadow. So we want to emphasize this part, the bottom. And just like that, we showed a little bit of shading again. And this will help us to not shade with color, but shade with line. And this whole part is going to be darker than anything else. And that's why we want to add a second pass of ink in there. And that will help us to convey the illusion that this is actually pretty dark. And here we can see that there's going to be a little bit dark here, because that's where the stem meets the other thing. And this part will be a little bit darker. And just like that, we're pretty much done with our inking. And I can just fill this in with any color that I want. And if you've seen my previous video on fill tool, it's pretty easy. You can grab and close and fill. And let's get here and see if it works in a pretty good way, hopefully. So we just lasso this entire thing. And it did pretty much a good job, you know. This whole thing pretty much almost covered by the ink and the color that we wanted, so we can just go ahead and fix it just a bit in here. And this way we can just keep adding color to this as we go. So now we have a simple flat, and this way we can just create a new layer and then Control Alt G to mask it, and this way we can just keep moving around for different colors in here. And for this simple one that I'm going to do is just get an airbrush and add a little bit of variety to this. And this whole part, I think it should be darker, maybe something like purple, like that. And I know the stem is probably going to be green because most of the time they're kind of green, and I like to go green for more blue for this, and more cyan, and this will give me a little bit more control over coloring. And the middle parts could be, you know, any color that you want, but because it's purple, I think it will be very nice to look with maybe yellow or some kind of orange or red, just like that. And that way we actually created our flower. And you know, sometimes sometimes black is a little bit of a harsh color, and so you can adjust this by selecting all the ink and merging it. Control Alt G, and this way we can actually fill in with whatever color that we want. And sometimes I like to go with some dark red. And now we adjust the opacity just a little bit, and just like that, now it looks a little bit more appetizing, just a little bit more appealing. And this is a fun little illustration that I can maybe make a sticker out of it or something like that. And after this, we can just add a little bit more stem that is growing, probably happy little friends next to it. There's probably grass, something that grows along with the flower. We don't want the flower to be alone because they usually all grow together. And just like that, we can pick this color, grab an airbrush. If you're feeling lazy, go ahead and get some green in here, just like that. And I think it looks pretty interesting. You can also, of course, go back and maybe add a little bit more definition to these little things so that they don't feel as empty. And just for fun, you can always just go back and maybe add a little bit more highlights to this flower. And we can just pick the color that we had in our drawing and just do a little bit of inking for the highlights in the middle. And pretty much the same rule applies, just keep adding it along the flower, along the stem, and which way and which direction it's actually going. It doesn't have to be exact. Sometimes messy is a little bit good. Just like this. And we can also remove the opacity just a bit, or we can go ahead and add just a little bit of a blur for this so it's not as harsh. And for the line, we can set it to maybe overlay or multiply and reduce the opacity just a bit so it's not as harsh. Your flower is done, and there's many ways that you can do this, different styles and different ways. And I'll also show you after this, there's going to be a small demonstration of 3 different flowers that I drew as well, and there's going to be a little trick that will help you to maybe add some texture to this, because a lot of flowers are pretty nice if you add some fun textures to it. And yeah, let's get into it, and hopefully you learned just a little bit in this video. So thank you for watching, and happy painting. And after I'm done with these flowers, there's some things that I can do. And one of them is go into the layer and new correction layer and use levels. Levels is just pretty simple tool. I think I've went over it in some other videos, but in short, it's basically a contrast tool. And if you push it just a little bit to get a little bit more darks and push the bright areas a little bit more brighter, then you can get a little bit more saturated and just more tonal values in here. And after that, I went ahead and scanned a midtone paper, just a simple midtone with my like super cheap $20 scanner or something like that. It's not even that high quality, I think, but you can also find one on the internet for the texture. It doesn't have to be very, fancy. Just something that will work for your illustration. And you can set it to different layer modes. So, for example, multiply can work. If your illustration is very bright, it like blends in all the textures. And in this case, I just went out and went in the hard light and played around with the opacity. And you can see it makes it a little bit more warm um, overall. And it just feels a little bit more cozy, a little bit more homey. And I really like this effect. So maybe that will work for your illustration. And hopefully that was helpful for this part.